Everybody, welcome to the Cyber Monday show. Thanks for jumping on. We are joined by an absolute legend, CWInfosec. Sir, how's it going?
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for jumping on, man. It's been great. For people that haven't met you yet, and by the way, actually, if you're watching this, I have a link to his YouTube channel down in the description. Absolutely check it out. There's some awesome, educational videos, some excellent interviews on there. So, give him a subscribe and check out some of his stuff. But, sir, for people that haven't met you yet, do you mind just kind of going through, your background in cybersecurity and, what got you into, both the industry and, having a YouTube channel?
Lots to unpack there. So I guess I'll start with the easiest part. I do red teaming for an S&P 500 company out of Missouri. And so that's a little bit of a hot topic itself. What is red teaming? So I guess to make it as simple as I possibly can, it's like a very souped up penetration test whereby you have a crew or a tester going into the environment, looking for vulnerabilities, looking for security risks, or any problems with the people, the processes, and the technology with a cybersecurity focus. Sometimes that can entail physical assets, but I haven't personally been involved in such projects. I'm just saying the scope of red teaming is quite large. And what we're attempting to do through red teaming is different from penetration testing, where, let's say you found some risky situation or some vulnerability. A penetration test would be a very good option for a company to leverage if they wanted to understand the impact of those vulnerabilities or those security risks, specifically the impact. Because if you don't care about the impact, you can kind of build up your posture to the point where you're doing vulnerability assessments, and that gives you really good coverage, but you don't really understand the impact of what those vulnerabilities can lead to. And red teaming will take that a step further and will say, hey, as we're doing these tests, we want to assess, the target company or the target organization, whoever we may be testing. We want to understand what level of maturity they're at, and can they detect and respond to an adversary in their environment? That's really the key piece. Can you detect and respond to the testers? That's really where the difference between red teaming and penetration testing and all like the other aspects of, kind of offensive security based testing comes from, is really, can you detect and respond to an adversary? Mm-hmm. And so sometimes that will kind of entail, emulating specific threat actors. That's very valuable to organizations that are pretty mature with their security posture, because you may get to a point where you have a good red team and you're like, okay, we're very good at catching our employees doing this kind of stuff. Now, can we catch real bad guys? So let's leverage our red team to kind of playbook these adversaries, and let's figure out where those detections are working and where they're not working. And maybe we can adapt it to a new campaign for that threat actor. Where you run into problems is if that's the only thing that you do, well, you might get really good at finding real adversaries, but then your red team might pull some new tricks on you, and now you're back to square one. So you really have to build like a healthy balance between doing those kind of playbooks, but you also have to be thinking outside of the box too. You can't be doing the same things over and over, because on that same note, if you are doing the same things over and over, that might not be good experience for your blue team. You know what I mean? Like they might get stagnant. They might not be exposed to new tactics. And that's really where the red team is supposed to be shining. Is we're supposed to be very forward thinking. We're supposed to be looking at where these new techniques are going and where the old ones are going too, because you can teach an old dog new tricks in the world of red teaming. There's so many different topics that we could really go on from there, but that's in a nutshell what I do. And where I got started Not necessarily with offensive security, but where I really started my career was in the Air Force. I had some side jobs as a teenager before that, but my career started with the Air Force. And that was mostly like entry-level network technician kind of work. You know, hey, we'll go out to this office. You know, an end user has lost connectivity. Let's get that user back online, or maybe an entire building went offline. Let's get that building back online. And that was mostly my career for about 6 years, was mostly like network technician, network engineering kind of work. After I separated from the Air Force is really where I started transitioning into Infosec. And so that first entailed a role in network audit support, kind of saying, hey, we know we have network infrastructure out there that should be part of our patch management process. But, you know, this infrastructure still has its own problems. So we have to address that. And there's a lot of compliance obligations that are involved in that. So that kind of led me to switching to vulnerability management, and then from vulnerability management into red teaming.
That's awesome. I mean, definitely there's so much to talk about here, because I want to talk about red teaming. I want to talk about, I mean, and even from red teaming, there's so much to talk about with red teaming. I want to talk about, I mean, kind of like your time in the Air Force and how that transition into InfoSec. But I guess starting with red teaming, you know, working chronologically, you know, you talk about emulating, you know, different threat groups and trying to, you know, replicate playbooks, as you said, you know, and audit the blue team's effectiveness at catching the bad guy in the network. How much time do you dedicate to studying specific threat groups and really trying to, I don't want to say infiltrate, but really digest and understand, you know, different threat groups' psychology, as well as their tools, techniques, and procedures?
This might be a little bit of a hot take. I read a lot about Conti whenever their playbook was kind of disclosed. Mm-hmm. But beyond specifically Conti, I don't read on any particular threat group. Not on a regular basis anyway, because it's for those same reasons why you don't want to continually do that specifically for testing. You know, there's a really big internet out there with a lot of different holes to find. And, you know, I only have so much time in the day. And, you know, a lot of these threat actors will use techniques that I kind of already know. And so there's not a lot of value gain from me specifically reading about a lot of threat actors. But on that same note, sometimes you'll get really advanced ones. And those ones I do read up on quite a bit. So anything revolving around equation group, I'm heavily reading that as often as I possibly can, because they are without a doubt the most skilled threat actor on the internet. And there's some theories out there of who they may be affiliated with. I can't really speak to it. I just don't know. But what I do know is that their work is very good. Some of the best work in adversarial tradecraft that's ever been done. So when threat actors like that come along, yes, I pay a lot of attention to that, because there are definitely people out there that are smarter than I am. And threat actors like Equation Group are definitely better at what I do than I am. And, you know, for me to kind of have like a little bit of arrogance in the mix as a tester. So I know I just said, you know, I don't really read a lot on a lot of different threat actors. It's just the ones that I do pay attention to, I pay attention to because they're good and I want to be skilled like them, but for different reasons. So a little bit contentious there, but you know, really the important part, I think, is to maybe understand the methodology behind all of it, because, you know, when you can understand, you know, hey, this event or, you know, this indicator kind of describes to me how far along in the attack methodology that threat actor may be. So, if we get alerts saying, hey, a threat actor's scanning. Okay, well, that might mean an attack is imminent. That also might just mean that they're probing. It's kind of hard to tell. So that's really where the red team shines. It's helping your defenders build that experience so that they can do that deconfliction.
Mm-hmm. How often? Well, I guess I'll back up. Back to a little bit with different APTs and threat groups. How much variance is there really between the different threat groups? Once they're attacking, like, is it really, do you notice significant variations between the different threat groups and the different resources that they target, or is it really just kind of like, they all kind of enumerate mostly the same way, they'll find mostly the same things, and they'll attack it exploiting the same thing, or exploiting the same vulnerabilities?
That was a little more difficult to answer because on one hand, just the way that I understand this field, I could see an argument where, yeah, a lot of threat actors kind of do the same general things, but do they do the same specific things? No, they don't. There is a lot of variance when you start getting more granular into the different techniques. So, as an example, APT 9001, at a certain stage in post exploitation, they might be using, I don't know, MITRE attack technique 4023, and 4023 being an example, downloading malicious software from the internet through bits admin or something. Well, there might be another threat actor that specifically uses bits admin to download other stuff, but they might be using PowerShell cradles. They might be using VB script. They might be using any number of other methods to pull that kind of stuff down. So where the similarities are is, at what stage of the attack path are they? If they're at the point where, we get indicators saying, hey, they've pulled the file down. This is the technique that we used. There might be some similarities between a new campaign and an old campaign from the same threat actor. I would be, I don't know that I would be able to speak to how common that is between different threat actors doing the same thing, but ultimately they'll generally follow the methodology. That's almost always the same. Mm-hmm. You see probing activity, you see enumeration activity where they're getting a little bit more information than what they would get from probing. Okay, well, now from enumeration, now they've started password spraying accounts. Now we have an incident. So it's just really hard to really deep dive on that, just because I can see arguments for both sides. But that's a great question, because I don't really hear a lot of people talking about that either. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, to be honest, I haven't done a crazy amount of research on the different threat groups. I feel like I'm totally unqualified to speak on that. So, yeah, I guess a follow-on question. So, but kind of just going from your answer, it sounds like it's kind of a mix between the tools that they use to mostly do the same thing, and then post exploitation, that's where you start to get the most variance. Is that correct?
Well, even then, there's still a lot of variance before that point too. So, let's say we have like a pretend company, and we're worried about two threat actors. We'll say APT1 and APT2. For the sake of not confusing people, let's call them APTY or APTA and APTB. I think that would probably be the least confusing for everyone. So, and if you work in this industry, you'll know why that would be confusing.
Yeah, it's like, APT1. Why would you be those ones specifically? What?
Yeah. Okay, so we got APTA and APTB. APTA, they might be probing externally with Nmap, And there's a whole list of indicators that are specific to Nmap that we could be looking for. Mm-hmm. But APTB might be coming at us with mass scan or unicorn scan, or maybe a custom scanner that doesn't have any of the same indicators that Nmap did. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now you got to figure out what's this other tool that they're using. And so now you start getting into the world of threat intel. Now you start prioritizing, okay, well, which techniques do we assign, a higher level of severity than other techniques?
Yeah. And then of course, relaying that over to the blue team and getting those indicators into your tooling and stuff like that. That makes sense. That makes sense. So I guess kind of going to, your point on the equation group, on why, you think that they're the best out there. What are some reasons that you think that? There are specific, TTPs that they implement that are specific to them that other threat groups don't do, that make them less prone to being caught in specific environments? Or, what are some of those things?
Yeah. So let's talk about the genius tradecraft behind Equation Group. As far as I know, they are one of very few threat actor groups to have ever successfully attacked a power plant. In their specific case, the group that we believe was Equation Group, we believe Equation Group had attacked a nuclear power plant at Natanz in Iran, circa 2005 to 2007. Mm-hmm. And there was, from what I remember reading on that, there was no command and control involved at all. That was entirely, they let the payload run and do its thing, but they designed it so specifically that they didn't really need to implement command and control, because they knew exactly what target that they wanted to go after. They had some stolen certificates from Siemens, so that, if their code was to be inspected, they would say, whoever was analyzing that piece of software, they'd say, oh, this is signed by Siemens, this must be legit. Mm-hmm. Well, no, it's not. It just looks like it is.
Come to find out. Yeah. Siemens has some really weird centrifuge maintenance scripts.
Yeah, and this is all in one attack. One attack on one power plant. There was an entry through an air-gapped network via USB, and once that USB landed inside the air-gapped network, there were several 0 days, not like cute 0 days like what I disclose, like not 0 days in junk software that almost anybody can find. No, 0 days in Windows. And at the time, it was the almost revolutionary, because it's not, as far as I know, this is kind of me speaking outside of my realm of understanding, but as far as I know, it's not particularly common to be targeted with a 0 day, let alone multiple 0 days. So that kind of speaks to that threat actor's level of knowledge. Just those simple things combined. Stolen Siemens certs indicates to me that they have real people operating as sleeper cells in Siemens, which I promise you there isn't a threat group alive aside from Equation Group and the other state-sponsored threat actors that would even have the resources to be able to think about doing that. Mm-hmm. Getting into an air gap network, on one hand, you have to know what's on the other side of that air gap.
And it's not just like getting into just some arbitrary air gap network. There's a nuclear power plant in let's just say a country that doesn't let random people just get into a nuclear power plant.
Yeah, and for the sake of not trolling on about it, it's just all of these things combined tell me that this is not one person, mm-hmm. and it is not a group of people that don't know what they're doing. It sounds very much like these people know exactly what they're doing. Mm-hmm. They're well funded, and potentially have an agent of like a network of spies. So those three things alone should tell you this is very likely a state-sponsored attack, because those type of things, while they do happen in the private sector, those specific things are not particularly common. So it kind of makes you, it's like, well, you know, if I'm going to study a threat actor, you know, do I want to study, you know, a threat actor like Fancy Bear, where they have like really specific tasks that they always try to accomplish? That's great for threat emulation, but on the same note, there's other tricks that I want to learn too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. And if you're watching and you're kind of curious to learn more about this specific attack we're talking about, I put a link down in the chat. I also have it for replay in the description. A little scandalous. I get a little saucy in this one, and I wear a robe. So, warning. Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, great. You know, I think that is one of those points in cybersecurity history that I think everybody just kind of looks back on. Like on one hand, it's like cool, and then on the other hand, it's like holy crap. You know, like it kind of has a little bit of everything, where it's, you know, allegedly Thunderstruck played on the PA system. And like that's just kind of like one of those like, why, like, but it's funny. And then like on the other hand, it caused a nuclear facility to have a meltdown. So it's also kind of like, holy crap, you know. It's kind of like that mix of it's both humorous and sobering at the same time, kind of, you know, what this industry can really do whenever a threat group, you know, puts its mind to something. I kind of want to key on something that you kind of mentioned on setting a different threat group, and, you know, wanting to study a group that kind of hits a little bit of everything, right? With you know, how important is it for like someone that's interested in threat hunting and threat research, and I guess threat group analysis, you know, to vary? I guess I'm kind of interested in expounding on that point, you know, and not just keying in on one specific threat group or even like a few specific threat groups. I mean, how vast is the variety, you know, and not only in TTPs and behavior between the threat groups, but in the different, you know, skills that you might be able to learn if you're just watching what they do.
Right. So I think what I'm hearing as part of the question is, you know, maybe how can we study these threat groups to get a better understanding of the methodology in general? Is that kind of where we're going? Okay.
Yeah, and like kind of keeping like a broad scope instead of niching down too hard. Yeah. Sorry, I kind of word vomited the question. So,
well, there's great frameworks out there to help people really put all of that together. So MITRE ATT&CK would probably be the most prominent one that I can think of. And there's a sister framework for the detection and alerting side of MITRE ATT&CK called MITRE DEFEND. And so with ATT&CK, you can, you know, take apart campaigns or, you know, any publicly available threat intel information about that threat actor, and you can look through those reports. You can look through that documentation of what other people are seeing, and you can go back to the MITRE ATT&CK framework and say, hey, okay, we see this group using technique 9001. So, okay, let's focus down on technique 9001. What are maybe 2 or 3 tools that an adversary would be able to use to accomplish, you know, technique 9001? So when you approach it in that manner, you know, you take your bias away from a specific group and you kind of pigeonhole it toward the methodology itself. So, you know, instead of saying, hey, we're really concerned about APT-A, you know, let's deep dive on A's techniques and let's see what APT-B is doing in these same areas. Okay, now we have wide coverage between 2 threat groups on technique 9001. So now we can say, hey, with a reasonable level of expectation, we can say that we have detection capabilities for technique 9001, we've attributed it to these threat actors. And we've also seen through our research this being attributed to APTB. That's a great way to go about approaching it. Where you get caught in the fatigue of it is when you start really deep diving it and you're like, okay, well, APTA is using seatbelt. Seatbelt is an enumeration tool for Windows. So APTA is using seatbelt to determine Windows Defender is enabled on these other endpoints. Well, okay. Now you're starting to deep dive on seatbelt, which is a very limited value. So yeah, you have detections for seatbelt. Well, what if they use a completely different tool? Well, now you have to reorganize all of your threat intel, and you have to get your entire blue team onto, chasing the new ambulance, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas if you target like the actual techniques the tools are using, you can build triage between the different groups, and you can tackle the problem of the tool itself being used, but you can also tackle other tools that use that same capability. So this is really where you start getting into the topics that I'm getting super excited about, which is endpoint detection. So that might be a different discussion, though.
I got you. Well, I mean, that makes complete sense. And I guess for people, because I mean, a lot of people are, they get interested in cybersecurity because they want to get into, red teaming and pen testing and doing this kind of thing. How important is it for red team to kind of help steer the ship, kind of as you're saying? Because it sounds like red teaming really exists to kind of steer the blue team in the right direction. I mean, whenever in terms of setting up the right defense, right? And then I guess assisting the blue team and kind of enumerating all the different things, like all the different detections that they need to be prepared for. I guess, how important is it to kind of to keep in focus that, there's like the term purple team, right? That it's red team isn't just kind of like in its own silo, but it does exist really as like a support team to the blue team and to the wider, defense mission.
Yeah, that's generally how I like to, I guess, sell, the team to other people in the business, other business units. That's generally how I like to approach that kind of selling point during a scoping call. Is the red team is not here to make your decisions for you. We're here to help you make an informed decision. We're not here to tell you what to do. The best that we can do is we can tell you where your soft spots are, maybe where some missed opportunities are, and how you can go about improving those. But on that same note, it's really important for us as the testers, when we're making recommendations, to be as agnostic about solutions as we can. And when I say that, I mean not getting too attached to, as an example, one particular product or a particular vendor or a particular technology. We really try to stick with the fundamentals of what we know is a good solution for specific problems. And there are times where we kind of have to guess, but we're really not there to make the decisions for the business. We're just there to, and we're not even really there to necessarily steer the blue team in a better direction. But what we want to do is we want to give experience to those people on the blue team. We want them to have experience responding to a threat actor that they know, us, right? A friendly threat actor. We want them to be able to detect and respond to us. And we want them to also not think that we're their enemies, right? So it's not a competition. We're not in there to say, we're better than the organization or we're better than the blue team. It's not what it's about. It's, hey, we found some bugs or, we found some problems. Were you able to see this? And, if not, well, hey, this is a problem. Let's figure this out. So it's less about steering, and it's more about being a really helpful friend or relative.
Uncle Red Team.
Yeah, Uncle Red Team. That's probably like the best analogy, right? So let's say you have like a broken window. You know it's broken. Okay, here's what the red team is going to do. The red team is going to say, well, how broken is the window? Is it really broke or is it a little broke? Right. And then, depending on how you feel about it, we might throw a hammer through the window or we might throw a sledgehammer, or maybe a wrecking ball. Just that's a really good way to kind of like explain that, because it's it's kind of cartoonish, but on the same note, it's really like easy to understand too.
I mean, throwing hammers through windows is exactly what my uncle does. I think personally, I think there could not be a better analogy.
There definitely is.
So I kind of want to double back on your time in the Air Force, and then kind of pivoting over to cybersecurity from there. How helpful was that experience that you had in the Air Force? It's not, doing kind of like the network, stuff that you were talking about, and really what got you interested in cybersecurity once you got out?
Ooh, well, I had always had an interest in hacking since I was probably 15 or 16, I think. That's kind of a different story. So I had already had an interest in cybersecurity before I joined the Air Force. And even then, so the Air Force gave me knowledge in security fundamentals. So when I say that, I mean information the same type of information that you would get from like a Security Plus study book. So defense in depth, or the principle of least privilege, or general patch management, asymmetric and symmetric encryption. Those kind of stuff was taught to me in the Air Force, but all of the hacking side of things, I either taught myself or I learned through courses. And there's good ways and bad ways of approaching learning. If you get to a point where this is kind of a field that you're interested in, I would err on the side of caution of spending money, because the red side of things is very well documented these days. And I would actually argue it's probably easier to learn how to hack than it is to learn how to defend these days. I would actually make that argument, and it might not be wrong. But
I wouldn't disagree with it. I sure wouldn't.
But on that same note, getting good at it is a completely different story.
Yeah.
So you might learn all of the techniques. You might learn a lot of the popular tools, and then you'll run into a roadblock called antivirus, and then you'll get frustrated.
Yeah.
And now you got to learn some new things. So I think it's easy to learn, and I think that's fantastic. But on that same note, it also kind of causes some problems in the industry, because, well, you get a lot of people that are excited about the red side of things. And, there's kind of like a niche need for those people. So there was a guy that I ran into a number of years ago that explained his concept of what he called the Infosec Triangle, right? So you get, like a triangle, and at the top you have pen testers and red teamers, people that serve an important function, but you don't necessarily need a lot of them. On that same note, as you go down the triangle, you get closer to, like help desk and end user support kind of stuff. You need a lot of those people, because there's a lot of customers, and, customers pay the bills. They got to get help. So, the more niche that you go in this field, on one hand, the more difficult it is going to be to find work, just because there's not as much demand for it as there are in other cyber positions. But on that same note, you also might run into trouble, because the level of difficulty that's involved in that type of work almost skyrockets immediately. Like, as soon as you get outside of pen, and I don't even want to say, present this as like pen testing as being something that's easy. It's not. But it's just on that same note, with pen testing, you generally have like a week or so to do an assessment. you know, you might not have time to prepare your payloads for getting around antivirus. You might not have time to get your payloads around EDR. So there might be cases where, you know, you have the testers whitelisted. That's not necessarily great, but I mean, there's companies that do that.
Yeah.
But on that same note, like, time is money, and, you know, the business shouldn't be waiting on the red team or its pen testers to get the results that it needs. You know, it shouldn't be like that.
Value too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got to be really careful with burnout too.
Yeah. How do you, and I guess, I mean, man, because we're enumerating, I feel like every week, you know, regardless of whoever we're talking to and whatever we're talking about, we enumerate so many topics, and every single one of them is just like its own like massive like can of worms to dive into. But on the topic of burnout, you know, you mentioned just the challenge skyrocketing whenever you get into red teaming. Man, the burnout's got to be insane. The demand, not only with the work, like, you know, the tempo, but also with every single engagement, the amount of like focus and I say, like, you know, human resources, like the intellectual resource and power that you got to like put into that. I feel like that, you know, time to burnout is really much shorter than you probably like, right? So how do you manage that? You know, what are ways to like cool down? And I mean, how much of is it at an industry, at a macro scale? You know, how big of a problem is that organizations kind of need to find a way to balance? And does hiring more red teamers to kind of augment that load, you know, can that help with that?
I'm probably the worst person on planet Earth to talk about burnout with, because I'm always flying at like 100 miles an hour. So I never drive that fast, by the way. Like, I was just being facetious. That's not literal. So I don't even know my car could go that fast. But so anyway,
only one way to find out.
You could probably tell by like the bags under my eyes that I probably don't walk away from my desk too often. Right. You know, so like sometimes I'm over here and like, it's even kind of funny. Like sometimes I'll wake up in the morning and I'll be like, I should not have stayed up that late reading whatever it was I was reading the night before. Right. And then like later on that day, you know, like I might see the bags under my eyes again, but then I'm like Emperor Palpatine from Star Wars. Right. Someone's like, you need to step away from your desk. And I'm like, no.
No, you need to step away. Yeah.
So here's I guess if we're going into unsolicited advice of how to avoid burnout, make time for the people in your life that matter the most to you, because those people are going to tell you when you're flying a little too close to the sun with work. You know, generally family and friends will be the first to let you know if you're going a little too hard. You know, they'll be like, hey, we've noticed you haven't been calling lately. What's going on? You know, well, I haven't been calling lately because I've been working 12, 14 hours. Maybe you need to take a break then, right? So having a support network is definitely key. But you know, if you find yourself like me, where it's just really difficult to pull yourself away from the keyboard, sometimes you just got to let yourself crash. I know that sounds completely insane. Sometimes you actually need to let yourself burn out so that you have time to recover, right? Because like, if you try and force yourself into doing something that you might not necessarily want to do, you want to make healthy choices. But on that same note, like, you don't want to force yourself into doing something that's going to make you more uncomfortable than if you were to not do that in the first place. So you really have to just use your best judgment.
Yeah, I think that makes complete sense. I think it makes complete sense. I had like another question about red teaming. Completely lost it. So anyway, I feel like we've talked a lot about, you know, state-sponsored groups. We've talked about I mean, we've covered a lot. But on the topic of state-sponsored groups, I'm sure a lot of people might have seen some news on quote. I'm quoting somebody here. A little thing going on in Europe. I'll let people do some Googling and find out who said that. But what are some threats that folks should be preparing for right now? Well, hopefully be prepared for by now. And what kind of threat groups, if there's anybody interested in getting into threat intelligence, that maybe they could do some research on to kind of, I guess, familiarize themselves with this, I say terrain, but you get what I mean, familiarize themselves with this area.
For the threat intel side, I'm not exactly sure what a good resource for that would be. There's a good number of people that you can follow on Twitter that are pretty vocal in that space, but I can't think of any people off the top of my head. The closest person that I can think of that might get you kind of close to that realm would be Florian Roth. So Florian Roth will talk a lot about, he usually talks about like more of the detection side of things. So, hey, we see this type of activity. You can alert on it with this rule, something like that. So he might be a good resource to kind of pivot into that space. But as for resources off the top of my head, I wouldn't be able to tell you. What I would say, if you find yourself potentially affected by current events, have a way to contact someone that knows of your whereabouts and knows your current health. I would say that would probably be the most important thing. Have a way to contact somebody. And I would actually extend that into non-digital formats, right? So have someone close within your vicinity that you can go to, because, there might come a time where, even if you needed to reach out to someone, you might not necessarily be able to because of a cyber attack. So having that sort of defense in depth mindset, hey, if this method of my health and safety fails, what is my backup plan? Where is my escape route when the house is on fire? It's really simple things like that, making sure that your safety plans have a little bit of resiliency built into them. Yeah,
that makes complete sense. And also on people to follow on Twitter, I think Kevin Beaumont's pretty good as well. There was somebody else as well that I was thinking about, but the name's not coming back to me. I'll probably put it in the description if I can remember. But Kevin Beaumont, and yeah, for trying to, I guess, thinking back to whenever you were just getting into cybersecurity, what were some? Actually, no, I remember my initial question. Sorry, brain's going crazy. What got you into starting your YouTube channel and doing, some of the videos that you've made?
That really started off as, I guess, a side hobby. I've never really intended to make it into a much bigger thing. It kind of did that on its own. So originally, I had just wanted to put out information that I wish I had when I was studying for the OSCP. And so my first couple of videos were just review videos for the OSCP and the legacy OSCE, not the new one. I am not a modern OSCE. I'm very much an old OSCE. So trying to reclaim my status sometime in the next year or two. So, that's really where it started. And then, Tiberius has been an online friend of mine for a couple of years. I haven't spoken to him too much recently, but, so he was my first guest, and through Tiberius, I've really come to know a lot of the crowd at the Infosec Prep Discord, quite well over the last couple of years. And they've really been an awesome network for me. So, that's really where a lot of my attention kind of spawned from, because, there's other creators that have put way more effort into creation than I have. And I just happen to know the right people and be at the right place at the right time. So, where I would like to take it I'm kind of up in the air on that because I'm not exact. Like if you follow me on Twitter long enough, eventually I will have a take. So most recently it was with a mobile provider. So it just got to a point with in real life obligations that I needed to take care of. And on top of that, I also kind of felt like I wasn't being a good ambassador for people wanting to get into the field at the time. So I've kind of taken a step back from my own content creation because I kind of feel like I need to get things back on the rails with my life before I could maybe start doing that with other people. So that's kind of where I'm at with content creation. But I do have a couple of things coming up next month that I'm excited for. I've got 2 interviews. I'm really excited to get their stories out. But even beyond that, you know, getting into like the technical content, I kind of have some reservations about it because of YouTube's attitude towards security researchers and security content creators. So, I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that I could talk about, you know, like, do we want to talk about direct system calls and bypassing EDR hooks? I would love to. I would love to put content like that on YouTube, but the second I do, there's a very good chance that YouTube's going to say, you're teaching people how to get around antivirus and EDR, and that's not the kind of content that YouTube wants. So,
yeah. Yeah, I feel you on that one. That's, you know, I like to kind of like put stuff out as I'm learning, and like I'm kind of like diving into the offensive side on my own. And like I want to like kind of post when I'm learning, but at the same time, like same thing. I've seen what like Hackersploit, his channel went down for a brief moment. And like he's got a lot of stuff, and I'm like, man, yeah, no way.
Yeah, I mean, freaking who am I thinking of? Harley, Infinite Logins.
Yep.
I don't know how many times he's had problems with YouTube, and I mean, you could talk with Hartley for like 3 seconds and you'd figure out exactly what that dude's intentions are. He's not out to scam people at all. Like he's very much someone I respect. And the fact that YouTube will go to these creators and kind of bully them, it's like, well, what are you going to do about all these people, you know, posting videos of them DDoSing websites? Like
the actual, like actually doing that. Yeah. Yeah. I'm of the same mind with you on that one. I do want to, I want to shout out your interviews again, because I've enjoyed watching your interviews. I just think that they're really like thoughtfully done. I like that you kind of open them up with a good quote. You know, they're very good. What inspired, you know, doing interviews and kind of having them in the format that you do?
I take inspiration from a lot of much better content creators than myself. Lex Friedman is a podcast that I watch pretty regularly. I like to keep up on modern technology and kind of where it's going. So I really like to kind of mimic my format like Lex Friedman, because he's very well spoken. And, you know, when he opens up his podcast with quotes and just the manner in which he starts speaking about them it's captivating. Like it gets your interest. You're like, yes, my ears like this. My ears like this a lot. And so any opportunity that I can get to kind of recreate that energy in my own way, I love doing that. But yeah, there's some other content creators that I draw inspiration from that I probably shouldn't. If you've seen a couple of intros, you probably know which one I'm talking about.
Yeah. Oh, and I mean, I feel like Lex Friedman is like a great inspiration to pull from, because I'm also a big fan of Lex Friedman. He's got some good stuff. So I guess, you know, kind of pivoting over to, you know, we've talked about the channel and interviews. You know, what's kind of like the hope for, I guess, like the future of this is a big question, but I'm also going to take some inspiration of, you know, from Lex Friedman and ask a big question that we can unpack with it. what are your hopes for the future of cybersecurity? And if we want to niche down a little bit more, you said you're passionate about EDR, and also, of course, red teaming. So, what are some things that you'd like to see, in the future in both of those areas?
On the red teaming side, a kind of a vision for the future of humanity that I really kind of like entertaining is a hacker in every household, right? So whether that's Billy or Sally, doesn't matter. It's
Uncle
a hacker
Red
in every household. Maybe it's grandma, maybe it's not grandma, maybe it's Uncle Red Team. I would love to see some form of that come to fruition through my content, but I mean that's much larger than what I'm doing now, and even then, like the effort that I'm putting in now is just, it's not enough to ever see that come true. But if I could potentially get to the point where I'm getting people excited about red teaming, I'm getting people excited about exploring ideas that maybe they didn't think that they could before, exploring different areas of knowledge that maybe they thought that they weren't capable of diving into, because I used to think of myself as pretty stupid. As time has gone on, I hear a lot from other people, well, CWInfosec, you're so smart. And it's like, I don't think so. Like, I could show you my grades from high school. They're really not that impressive. But one thing that I have always done is I've always challenged ideas. I've always challenged, hey, is this the only way that it can be done? And so leading into my hopes for the defense side of things, I would hope that eventually our industry stops building detections how humans think and approach these problems. And I would hope that we start approaching these problems like how a machine might think and approach these problems, right? So if you want to do like a small tangent into what I'm talking about. So, I would like to see the defense side of our industry getting to a point where we're not relying on, string indicators, or, we're not relying on rules based off of tool names, or, specific directories that it gets executed out of. I would like to see a more machine-like approach to it. Maybe let's have events, when you call a function, or when you invoke some code, maybe let's have like some sort of pre-event and post-event saying, hey, this thing is trying to do this action, or this thing has already performed this action. And, maybe let's start building our detection logic around, the actual code itself, rather than, how the malware author wrote in like the specific things to get around like a static indicator. That's what I would love to see. I would love to see a more machine-like approach on the defense side.
Kind of going from that, would you say behavioral based detection is more computationally I don't know. Maybe I'm forgetting something, but for the vast majority of organizations to be able to take advantage of that capability, right? Is behavioral based detection from like AI, say, so it's much quicker and able to recognize that and build alerts around it? Would that be much more computationally lost the word, much more computationally demanding, let's say, than signature based detection, right? Or does it really not matter? In either case, those alerts will fire, and the detection team can actually recognize and triage that ticket.
So I would contend there's certainly opportunities for less compute needed for those static signatures, but when we talk about behavioral based kind of things, are they actually behavior based detections? Because I don't know how many antivirus engines I've gone up against where, you know, they claimed to have some sort of heuristics engine, and what it actually was like a DLL loaded into the process, just watching for like the same old static things, but you know, instead of scanning it on disk, now it's just doing those same static things but in memory, and that's all of a sudden behavioral.
Yeah.
No. So even on like the machine learning side, I have a little bit of knowledge in this area, right? So when we say that we're using machine learning to do detections, right? Okay, what did you build that data set with? Because if you built that data set off of, you know, the hashes of, I don't know, several thousand instances of malware, well, I mean, any individual change to any of those pieces of malware is instantly going to change what that hash is. So, I mean, like, where is the like the realm of probability within an nth dimensional cube, right? What is the source of data being fed into that, right? Because, you know, if it's things that you could use that technology intelligently for, like object detection or, you know, pulling out, you know, maybe saying like text from an image or something, those are great use cases for it. But when you're saying, oh yeah, we built a data set of thousands of pieces of malware, I mean, like, you run into the polymorphism problem with it. Well, what if they just changed the encoder for that malware? Or what if they changed an individual byte and now the entire hash is wrong, right? So if you built a data set off of legacy style indicators like that, like the entire data set is useless. So, I mean, what are we using as the source for the data set? That would be my first question, right? And even then, like, how do you implement that? Do you use a decision tree to implement that, or do you use a concurrent neural network, or do you use a recurrent neural network? Because there's different use cases for each of those. And I find a lot of the terminology being thrown around specifically in the antivirus space, not necessarily the endpoint detection, but specifically in the antivirus case. I hear a lot of words that are thrown around that aren't actually true, right? So, we'll take like the case of a sandbox. Sometimes a sandbox isn't actually a sandbox. Sometimes, again, it's just the antivirus engine loading a DLL onto a process, waiting for like a minute to see what the process does. And then after that minute has concluded, now it's going to not attach itself to the process and everything's clean. That's not a behavior-based detection. That's stupid, right? Why would you ever think that was a good idea? All you have to do is let the payload sleep for a minute, and that entire mechanism is worthless. So yeah. I kind of have a negative attitude toward that part of the industry. So I would maybe take what I have to say with a grain of salt, because there are vendors out there that actually do use machine learning. There are vendors out there that do have real behavior-based analysis. It's usually not implemented in the way that you typically think it is.
So, I mean, it sounds like customization is really an important quality in a lot of the tooling for the team, right?
Yes.
Being able, like for example, like where you were talking about with, you know, having the malware payload wait 60 seconds and then you've bypassed sandboxing, you know, or even just having an actual sandbox. You know, tying that into, I guess, machine learning and AI, you know, being able to customize the learning function to your environment and actually be able to catch that. So I guess, would you say it comes down to both, you know, I don't want to sound down on vendors or anything, like them not, you know, matching their marketing, but, you know, vendors actually, you know, without being down on them, matching, you know, what they're saying, but also, you know, for organizations to be able to have the customization to be able to tailor their products for their environment, and I guess in some degree to have like the human on the other side, the other end of the console, being able to do that. Would you say it's kind of like a big friction point moving into the future?
It could be. It certainly could be. I think where the contention is likely going to happen. I don't know if it'll happen anytime soon, but I think at some point in the near distant future, some form of technology is going to come out that will be making it very difficult to have people employees in cybersecurity. I wouldn't throw that across all of like every single cyber role, but certainly on like the network engineering, network security engineering side of things. So building firewalls, building rule sets for firewalls, and implementing those types of design. Software-defined networking is already kind of killing jobs in that area. And that could be potentially an issue down the road, because you kind of need people to watch the technology that is watching the other technology. It hasn't really gotten to the point where technology can kind of maintain and manage and secure itself, but I don't think those times are too far off from now. So that would be something that I would be gravely concerned with, but it's a little bit, I think that might be a little bit of a different concern from what you asked.
Well, I definitely think that that's an interesting thread to kind of dive into. And it kind of makes me think about the cloud a little bit too, is, and to tie that into red teaming, how is the cloud impacted, you being able to do pen testing and red teaming more specifically, where those assets aren't on-prem that the company owns, those assets belong to, a vendor, What is that like? Are you still able to audit those systems, or do you have to kind of rely on the vendor or the cloud vendor to be able to audit those systems for you, and just kind of trust that they are fully, I guess, maintaining the security of those systems for you?
Yeah, a lot of that is going to depend on licensing. So what your agreement is with the cloud provider. But the licensing discussion aside, the major cloud providers, so AWS, Azure, I don't personally know about Google Cloud, but I would imagine Google Cloud would likely have a similar policy. So Microsoft and Azure and AWS for sure will allow you to do any type of testing that you want on things that are within your subscription or within your EC2. So things that you directly have spun up or manage or have authorization to manage, they will let you freely test that without any notification, but you have to be careful with that. So you can attack your assets in the cloud. You cannot attack Amazon's assets in the cloud, and you cannot attack Microsoft's assets in the cloud. So you can attack your own stuff in the cloud, just not other people's stuff. And that can be a little bit confusing, maybe I think to the less experienced crowd, because, when you think of the cloud, you think, oh, well, these are a lot of systems maybe acting, simultaneously together or orchestrated in some fashion. But there is actually a fair amount of segmentation involved in public cloud. So it's not as big of a risk as you might think it is. It's just, you still want to exercise caution when you go in to do tests in public cloud. It's just, you don't have to stress out about it. You're not going to get in trouble with AWS or Azure for testing your own stuff.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. We'll go ahead and unwind this up here in just a bit. But, and thank you again for jumping on. This has been a lot of fun. Again, I feel like, we'll have to probably circle back at some point and kind of like pick up a lot of these threads that we initiated, because there's so much to talk about. What's your advice for someone that's aspiring to get into red teaming, and maybe they're, having a hard time right now?
Yeah. Prepare for a lot of pain and suffering.
Uncle Red Team is out there. He's hungry. That sounded weird.
Yeah. So I can honestly say, since I started doing this a couple of years ago, there has not been a single day where I woke up and I was like, this isn't something I want to do. There has never been a day where those words came out of my mouth. Even on the hard days, even on the days where, you know, I work 14, 16 hours sometimes, that's not common. Every once in a while, accidents happen. But even on those hard days, I've never gotten to the point where I was like, this is too much for me. There were times like that in the Air Force. There were absolutely times like that in the Air Force, but you know, a lot of those struggles kind of came from other people, not necessarily from the Air Force itself. And likewise on the job here. So if you really want to get started in red teaming, you have to ask yourself, do I currently have the skills to be a red teamer? And I'm sorry, like, that's a tough question that you got to ask yourself. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to go into a job that is going to be more than you can chew, right? You don't want to bite off more than you can chew, because that's a fast way to not living a happy, healthy life. That's an easy way to make yourself depressed. That's an easy way to make yourself feel like you're not good enough. And so if you really want to get started, ask yourself, do I have a basic fundamental understanding of computer networking and system administration and security principles, security fundamentals, and penetration testing? You need to know all of this stuff before you can start red teaming. And I'm like, a lot of people will say you don't necessarily need to know coding. It's a little bit of a half truth. There are things that you can do. You can get by without knowing a ton of it. You'll pick up quite a bit of it just studying. You'll pick up quite a bit, but even then, you still will eventually hit the wall of antivirus and EDR, and you're going to have to deal with that, because you can't go into a red team engagement and ask the blue team for an exclusion. You can't do that, because you know what the blue team's going to tell you? I mean, I'll just ask StudioSec right now, hey, can I get an exclusion?
Heck no.
That's exactly what they're going to say. So you have to make sure that if you want to be a red teamer, that you have the skills necessary to do the job, because there's not, like, there is some documentation around like the more difficult aspects of the job, but there's not a lot of it. And you will get to a point where you can ask other people for help, but you got to find those people too. You know what I mean? Like, you can't just go into some random Discord and ask someone, you know, hey, how do I unhook a kernel hook in the L-star MSR register? Most people are going to be like, what the hell is L-star MSR? Right? And then there's going to be one dude that actually knows what you're talking about. And he's going to be like, oh yeah, if you want to read this, you have to read like a bunch of documentation from Intel or something. And then, like, then you have to know assembly, right? So it just kind of spirals out of control if you're not prepared. That's what I would say. If you want to really be a red teamer, prepare yourself for the job, because you're not going to get a lot of help. And the people that can help you are really difficult to find.
I love it. I think that that's such good advice. You know, I don't know if it's talked about enough, you know, just being prepared. Preparedness is important. Well, we have one more question here before we wrap up from Mary C. Is there a cybersecurity news source that you like to check for cyber news, like, or anything on Twitter or Feedly?
This might sound a little surprising. It might not. I actually come to StudioSec for all my cybersecurity news.
That's not good. You're missing a lot of news. There's so much I don't report on just because it's so much news.
I'll casually peruse like Google News or something, you know, get like those aggregate sites. But no, like, actually for all of my cybersecurity news, I actually go to StudioSec, because
I appreciate someone's watching it.
And it's like it's someone that I know knows what they're talking about, and not someone that's gonna like spread misinformation. And
that you
Too.
think
I mean,
is
I
gonna
like your
spread
content
misinformation.
anyway, so like, it's like a best of both worlds for me.
Yeah, that you think is not going to spread misinformation. Little do you know. For me, I feel like Bleeping Computer is a pretty great source. ZDNet, and really Twitter is just solid. Like Kevin Beaumont. Who did you recommend again for EDR Twitter?
Florian Roth.
Yes, I know that I follow him. Shoot, there's just so many. I feel like that's whenever like cybersecurity really thrives. Unfortunately, is whenever crap's happening because everyone just starts chirping and everyone's sharing the things that they're learning. It's very beneficial, but whenever bad things aren't happening, the infighting begins. So it's like, this is terrible. We need that external enemy of the APTs, or this whole thing's falling apart.
It's wild, man. Like sometimes I don't know like which shoe I'm supposed to put on which foot. And then like I go on Infosec Twitter and it's like, it doesn't matter which foot you put your shoe on.
Yeah. Then you have somebody with like red ink just kind of like showing that they don't wear shoes and it's fine. It's like, okay. But anyway, that is a niche joke. Anyway, so, sir, thank you so much for jumping on. This has been just an absolute blast. I feel like it's been great. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed this. This was awesome.